You think you evolved from monkeys, maybe chimpanzees, specifically. A straight line, ape to human, getting smarter and less hairy with every step. That version is comforting. It's also wrong. You did not evolve from chimpanzees. Chimpanzees are not your ancestors. They're your cousins. Picture two brothers. Each one starts a family. Generations pass. Their descendants end up looking completely different from each other. But neither family descended from the other. They both descended from the same set of parents, further back. That's you and chimpanzees. Somewhere around 7 million years ago, there was a single population of apes in Africa. One branch of its descendants became modern chimpanzees and bonobos. The other branch became you. That shared ancestor isn't alive anymore. Nobody has ever found its skeleton intact enough to be certain what it looked like. But based on fossils and comparisons with living apes, scientists think it spent most of its life in trees. Long arms, curved fingers built for climbing, a brain roughly a third the size of yours. For millions of years, that arrangement worked. Then the climate did something your ancestors had no control over, and everything changed. Around 7 million years ago, Earth started cooling. Slowly. Too slowly for any single animal to notice in its own lifetime. But across generations, Africa's forests began shrinking. Open grasslands spread where dense canopy used to be, and your tree-dwelling ancestors suddenly had a serious problem. The next fruit tree wasn't a few branches away anymore. It might be hundreds of meters across open, exposed ground, patrolled by big cats and hyenas and giant eagles. You'd think the obvious move would be to stay in the shrinking forests and adapt slowly. Some populations did exactly that. Their descendants are chimpanzees and gorillas today. But another population made a different bet. They started spending more time on the ground. That wasn't a decision made by anyone. It was survival math playing out across hundreds of thousands of years. And it produced something strange. Fossils of early relatives like Sahelanthropus and Ardipithecus show a body still mostly built for climbing, but with one crucial shift already underway: the pelvis, the leg bones, the position of the skull on the spine, all pointing towards something no ape had ever committed to before: walking upright, permanently, on two legs. Here's a question worth sitting with for a second. Walking on two legs isn't faster than running on four. It's not obviously better in a fight, or a chase, or a climb. So why would evolution favor it at all? There's no single answer, and that itself tells you something about how evolution actually works. Standing upright uses less energy over long distances than a four-legged gait. It frees your hands to carry food or an infant while you walk. Standing taller lets you spot danger over tall grass before it spots you. And exposing less of your body directly to the midday sun may have helped your ancestors avoid overheating on landscapes with almost no shade left. None of these advantages alone explains it. Evolution rarely rewards one dramatic leap. It stacks tiny advantages, generation after generation, until the accumulation becomes irreversible. You are walking around today on legs that were built by that accumulation. Every step you take is a several million-year-old solution to a climate problem you never personally faced. In 1974, an American paleoanthropologist named Donald Johanson was surveying a dry valley in Ethiopia. Late in the day, with the team about to head back to camp, he noticed a small piece of arm bone lying in the dirt. Then another bone nearby. Then another. Within hours, it was clear this wasn't one stray fossil. It was a partial skeleton, more complete than almost anything found before it. That night, the Beatles' song "Lucy in the Sky with Diamonds" played on repeat around the campsite, and the name stuck. Lucy lived roughly 3.2 million years ago. She stood about 1 meter tall. Her knees, hips, and feet were already shaped for walking upright, just like yours. If you saw her crossing open ground from a distance, you might mistake her for a small person. But her arms were unusually long, her fingers slightly curved for climbing, and her brain, at around 400 cubic centimeters, was barely larger than a chimpanzee's, less than a third the size of yours. Here's the part that overturned decades of assumptions. For a long time, scientists believed big brains came first, and walking upright followed as a consequence of getting smarter. Lucy proved the opposite. Her kind had been walking upright for well over 1 million years before brain size started expanding in any serious way. Becoming human wasn't one dramatic leap where intelligence switched on and everything else followed. It was small steps, arriving in an order nobody would have predicted. Legs first, mind second. So if it wasn't a bigger brain that changed everything at first, what did? A sharp piece of stone. Walking upright let your ancestors travel farther and reach new food sources, but it created a new problem too. A growing, active body burns more calories than fruit and leaves alone can supply. Meat was an obvious answer, except your ancestors weren't skilled hunters yet. At first, they were scavengers. Picture a lion finishing a kill and walking away. What's left behind still holds meat, fat, and bone marrow, locked inside bones no ape's teeth could crack open. Your ancestors discovered that a sharp stone could do what their bodies couldn't: cut skin, break bone, unlock food that had been sitting there the whole time, inaccessible, until someone changed the object in their hand instead of changing their own body. That single shift, reshaping the world instead of only adapting to it, became one of the most important traits your entire lineage would ever develop. Around 2.4 million years ago, a new species appears in the fossil record. Scientists call it Homo habilis, meaning handyman, because early stone tools were found alongside its bones. Its brain had grown to around 600 cubic centimeters. Still nowhere near yours, but a real shift. Its hands were better suited for gripping and shaping objects, and it still wasn't safe. Lions, leopards, hyenas, and crocodiles were constant threats it couldn't outrun and couldn't overpower. Its real advantage wasn't strength, it was flexibility. Stone flakes let it butcher animals other predators had killed. Cracked bones, released marrow no other scavenger could reach. Those extra calories, repeated across hundreds of thousands of generations, may have helped fund the next major shift, a brain that kept growing. You'd expect this story to move steadily toward one single, improving human lineage. It doesn't. It gets far stranger. Think about how strange that actually is for a second. You've probably always pictured human evolution as one lineage steadily improving, like a video game character leveling up. Ape to slightly less ape, to caveman, to you. That image is almost everywhere, printed on t-shirts, drawn as a single line of figures walking left to right, each one taller and less hunched than the last. It's also almost nothing like what actually happened. If you traveled back 400,000 years, you wouldn't find one kind of human on Earth. You'd find several, at the same time, sometimes overlapping in the same regions. Human evolution wasn't a straight line climbing toward you. It was a branching tree, and most of those branches eventually went extinct. One of them became the Neanderthals. For most of the 20th century, popular imagination painted them as dumb, hunched brutes. The evidence says otherwise. Neanderthals survived in Europe and Western Asia for roughly 400,000 years, enduring ice ages brutal enough to end most species. Their bodies were shorter and more powerfully built than yours, with thick bones and broad chests built to conserve heat. They hunted enormous animals, bison, wild horses, even woolly rhinoceroses, at close range with wooden spears, which required real planning and real courage. Here's the detail that should genuinely surprise you. Many Neanderthal skeletons show broken ribs, fractured limbs, catastrophic injuries that had healed years before death. An injured hunter who could no longer gather food wasn't abandoned. Someone fed them. Someone protected them. Someone kept them alive long after they stopped being useful in any practical sense. Compassion, it turns out, isn't uniquely yours. Neanderthals also selected different types of stone for different tools, prepared animal hides for clothing, and controlled fire deliberately. Some sites show evidence of natural adhesives used to attach stone points to wooden handles, a multi-step technique passed down carefully enough to survive across generations. This wasn't instinct repeating itself blindly. This was knowledge taught. In 2008, archaeologists in Siberia's Denisova cave found something almost too small to matter, a fragment of finger bone. Too small to identify by shape alone, so researchers extracted its DNA instead. The results stunned them. It wasn't Neanderthal. It wasn't modern human. It belonged to an entirely unknown branch of humanity, later named the Denisovans, known today almost entirely through genetics rather than skeletons. And their story doesn't end in extinction the way you'd expect. Many people alive today, particularly across parts of Southeast Asia, Papua New Guinea, and Australia, still carry Denisovan DNA, inherited from encounters we have almost no fossil evidence for beyond that single bone. On the island of Flores in Indonesia, researchers found something else entirely. Tiny humans, barely over a meter tall, who evolved smaller bodies and smaller brains after generations of isolation, yet still made tools and still survived. Evolution doesn't always move toward bigger and smarter. Sometimes smaller is the better answer. Then, around 300,000 years ago in Africa, another branch appeared. At the time, nothing marked it as special. It shared the landscape with Neanderthals, Denisovans, and other human relatives still barely understood. It wasn't the strongest. Neanderthals were more powerfully built and better suited to cold. It didn't even have the biggest brain. Neanderthal brains were, on average, slightly larger. This branch was Homo sapiens, you. So if strength wasn't the answer, and raw brain size wasn't the answer, what actually made the difference? Behavior. Homo sapiens became extraordinarily good at passing knowledge sideways and forward, not just down a family line, but across an entire group and across generations that never met each other. A better way to shape a spear, the location of a seasonal water source, a hunting technique that worked, none of it had to be rediscovered from scratch by every new child. It could simply be taught. Each generation started further ahead than the last one. Culture itself became a survival tool, arguably a more powerful one than any single physical trait evolution had produced before it. Language almost certainly mattered enormously here, even though it left no fossils behind. No archaeologist will ever excavate the first conversation. But by at least 100,000 years ago, the archaeological record shows behavior that's hard to explain without increasingly complex communication, coordinated long-distance hunts, detailed shared knowledge, traditions passed on with enough precision to survive intact. And then something appeared that had no obvious survival purpose at all: art. Deep inside caves in Europe and Indonesia, people painted animals with real skill. In Africa, pieces of ochre were deliberately engraved with geometric patterns. Shell beads were shaped and worn as ornaments. None of it caught a single animal or built a single shelter. People spent real time and effort on it anyway. Maybe it marked identity, maybe status, maybe something closer to what you'd call meaning. Whatever it was, it shows a mind that had stopped merely surviving the world and started interpreting it. Around 70,000 years ago, groups of Homo sapiens began leaving Africa, not as one grand exodus, but as countless smaller journeys spread across thousands of years. Some followed coastlines toward Arabia, others pushed into Asia, then Europe, then, tens of thousands of years later, Australia and the Americas. Wherever they arrived, they sometimes met other human species already living there. For a while, these different kinds of humans coexisted. Sometimes they competed for the same resources. Sometimes they shared knowledge. And sometimes they had children together. If your ancestry traces outside Africa, you likely still carry a small percentage of Neanderthal DNA in your cells right now. Some populations across Asia and the Pacific carry Denisovan DNA as well. This isn't a story of one species cleanly replacing another. It's a story of partial merging, DNA from species that no longer exist anywhere on Earth, still quietly running in the bodies of people alive today. Yet by around 40,000 years ago, something had shifted for good. One by one, the other human species disappeared. Neanderthals, Denisovans, the small-bodied humans of Flores. Exactly why remains one of the biggest open questions in anthropology. Climate change likely played a role. Competition for the same resources probably did too. Some populations were partially absorbed through interbreeding rather than vanishing outright. There wasn't one single cause. But the outcome was unmistakable. For the first time in millions of years, only one human species remained standing: you. For nearly 7 million years, the entire story had one quiet, unglamorous engine behind it. Survive long enough to have the next generation. That's it. Lucy wasn't trying to become human. Homo habilis had no idea its descendants would eventually leave the continent entirely. Nobody along that chain could see more than a few years ahead, let alone imagine what their bodies were slowly becoming. And yet you are the result. Look down at that arm again. That gentle curve of muscle is a leftover instruction from a creature that lived its entire life in trees, millions of years before anyone who looked like you existed. Your spine still carries the compromises of a skeleton built for climbing, repurposed for standing upright. Your knees and lower back ache sometimes because upright walking was never a perfect solution, just the best available trade-off at the time. The goosebumps that rise on your skin in the cold are a leftover command to fur you no longer have. None of it was designed for you specifically. All of it was simply never deleted. Evolution doesn't erase the past. It builds on top of it, layer after layer, and hands the whole accumulated structure to you without an instruction manual. You are not a finished product. You are the latest. And millions of years from now, if another intelligent species uncovers our fossils, they may wonder about us in exactly the same way we wondered about Lucy. Where did they come from? How did they live? And what kind of world did they leave behind?